A young woman named Fiona Broom attended a conference where she casually mentioned the tragic death of Nelson Mandela in a South African prison during the 1980s. She remembered the televised funeral, the widow's tears, and the international mourning. But there was one problem. Nelson Mandela was still alive. He would not die until 2030, decades after her supposed memory of his death. When Fiona shared this experience online, thousands of people came forward with the exact same memory. They remembered the same funeral, the same news coverage, the same historical event that never happened in this timeline. This was not a simple case of misremembering. This was evidence of something far more disturbing, something that ancient mystery schools warned about for millennia, something that modern authorities desperately want to keep hidden from the masses. Because if you understand what is really happening with the Mandela effect, you will unlock the terrifying truth about the nature of your reality and the invisible forces controlling your perception of existence itself. What you are about to discover in this video will fundamentally change how you see the world around you. The evidence is undeniable, the pattern is clear, and the implications are absolutely shocking. Because the Mandela effect is not a psychological phenomenon. It is not mass confusion or false memories. It is scientific proof that you are shifting between parallel timelines, and this shift is accelerating at an unprecedented rate in 2025. More importantly, this shift is not happening by accident. There is an ancient intelligence behind this reality manipulation, and they have been doing this to humanity for thousands of years. The ancient Gnostics called them the archons, the rulers of this false reality. They warned that we live in a prison made not of bars, but of manipulated perception and altered timelines. They understood something that modern science is only beginning to rediscover. That reality itself is fluid, malleable, and under the control of forces that exist beyond our three-dimensional understanding. And right now, at this moment, those forces are shifting the timelines more aggressively than ever before. The question is not whether the Mandela effect is real. The question is why it is happening, who is causing it, and what they are trying to hide from your awakening consciousness. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you will have access to forbidden knowledge that mystery schools have protected for centuries. You will understand the mechanics of timeline shifting, the evidence that cannot be explained away, and most importantly, how to protect your consciousness during these reality fluctuations. This is not entertainment. This is not a theory. This is the suppressed truth about the prison you were born into, and the awakening that terrifies those who control it. Long before the term Mandela effect was coined, ancient civilizations possessed detailed knowledge about the nature of reality and timeline manipulation. The Gnostic texts, discovered in Nag Hammadi in 1945, contain explicit warnings about beings called archons, who control human perception through the manipulation of what they called the demiurge, a false reality construct that imprisons human souls. These texts were banned by the early church, hunted down and destroyed for centuries. The Vatican specifically targeted Gnostic communities, burning their libraries and executing their teachers. Why? Because these texts contained the blueprint for understanding exactly what you are experiencing with the Mandela effect today. The Gnostic Gospel of Philip states explicitly, "The world came about through a mistake, for he who created it wanted to create it imperishable and immortal. He fell short of attaining his desire, for the world never was imperishable, nor, for that matter, was he who made the world." This passage describes something remarkable. It describes a flawed simulation, an imperfect reality construct that requires constant adjustment and manipulation. The Gnostics understood that reality itself was a created prison, and that the creators of this prison, the archons, possessed the ability to alter human perception and memory to maintain control. In the Hermetic tradition, particularly in the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, we find even more specific information. Thoth, the Atlantean priest who supposedly lived for 36,000 years, wrote about the Hall of Records, a dimensional space where all possible timelines exist simultaneously. He described how advanced beings could navigate between these timelines and how humanity had been deliberately disconnected from this ability. Thoth warned that the sons of darkness seek to destroy the knowledge of the ancient, to suppress the understanding of the multidimensional nature of reality, so that man remains imprisoned in linear time, unaware of his infinite nature. The ancient Vedic texts of India contain perhaps the most detailed description of what we now call the Mandela effect. In the concept of Maya, or illusion, the Vedas describe reality as a dream projected by Brahman, the ultimate consciousness. But more specifically, the texts describe something called Kala, the wheel of time, which is not linear but cyclical and malleable. The Bhagavata Purana contains stories of sages who could perceive multiple timelines simultaneously, and who warned that during certain cosmic cycles, the boundaries between timelines would become thin, causing mass confusion and collective memory distortion. But here is where the suppression becomes obvious. In 1947, the same year as the Roswell incident, a series of ancient scrolls were discovered in caves near the Dead Sea. Among these Dead Sea Scrolls were texts that describe reality as a war between the sons of light and the sons of darkness, beings who controlled perception through the manipulation of time itself. These scrolls contained specific techniques for recognizing when timelines had been altered. Within months of their discovery, military intelligence agencies from multiple countries descended on the excavation sites. Certain scrolls were confiscated and have never been released to the public. Why would military intelligence be interested in ancient religious texts? Because those texts contained operational knowledge about timeline manipulation and reality control. The indigenous shamanic traditions from every continent on Earth possess oral histories about the dream time, the otherworld, the spirit realm, different names for the same concept that reality is layered, multidimensional, and constantly shifting. The Aboriginal Australians speak of dreamtime as the foundational reality from which physical reality emerges and can be reshaped. The Quero shamans of Peru perform ceremonies specifically designed to navigate what they call the Cauce Pacha, the web of living energy that connects all possible realities. They claim that during certain cosmic alignments, the boundaries between these realities weaken and mass timeline shifts occur. Now here is the connection that modern authorities desperately want to suppress. In 1943, the United States Navy conducted an experiment called the Philadelphia Experiment, officially known as Project Rainbow. The objective was to make a naval destroyer escort invisible to enemy radar. According to multiple whistleblower testimonies from crew members, the experiment did not just make the ship invisible. It caused the ship to completely vanish from physical reality and reappear in a different location and possibly a different timeline. Crew members reported memories of events that others did not remember, described seeing multiple versions of the ship existing simultaneously, and experienced severe psychological trauma from perceiving overlapping timelines. The Navy has consistently denied the experiment ever took place, despite extensive documentation and witness testimony. What the Philadelphia experiment accidentally discovered was what ancient mystery schools had known for thousands of years: that consciousness, electromagnetic fields, and reality itself are fundamentally connected. By manipulating certain frequencies and energy fields, the fabric of space-time itself can be bent, allowing for movement between parallel realities. And most importantly, that these movements leave traces, residual memories in certain individuals who are sensitive enough to perceive the shift. These people are not experiencing false memories. They are remembering actual events from timelines they previously inhabited before being shifted into this current version of reality. The ancient Egyptian mystery schools encoded this knowledge in their temples. The symbol of the Djed pillar, often misunderstood as a spine or a tree, was actually a representation of the axis between dimensions, the pillar that connects different levels of reality. initiates into the Egyptian mysteries, underwent specific training in the Hall of Two Truths, where they learned to perceive paradoxical realities existing simultaneously. This was not mythology. This was a technology of consciousness that allowed the initiate to maintain memory coherence across timeline shifts. The ancient Egyptians understood that reality itself was under the control of beings they called the Neteru, multi-dimensional intelligences who shaped the physical world according to principles most humans could not perceive. This brings us to the most suppressed piece of ancient knowledge. The concept of the Akashic records, described in Theosophy and Hindu philosophy as the cosmic library containing every event, thought, and possibility that has ever existed or could exist. Edgar Cayce, known as the Sleeping Prophet, accessed these records in trance states and described them as a dimensional space outside of linear time where all timelines exist simultaneously. Cayce specifically warned that humanity was approaching a period where the boundaries between timelines would dissolve, causing mass confusion, conflicting memories, and what he called the Great Sorting, where souls would be separated based on their ability to maintain consciousness, coherence during reality fluctuations. That period, according to his timeline, is now in 2025. Now let us move from ancient knowledge to modern scientific evidence that proves we are living in a malleable, multi-dimensional reality where timeline shifts are not only possible but actively occurring. The first piece of evidence comes from quantum physics, specifically the double-slit experiment, which has been baffling scientists since it was first conducted in 1801 by Thomas Young. This experiment proved beyond any doubt that particles exist in multiple states simultaneously until they are observed, at which point they collapse into a single state. What does this mean? It means that reality itself is observer-dependent, that the physical world does not exist in a fixed state, but rather exists as a field of infinite possibilities that only solidify when consciousness interacts with them. In 1957, physicist Hugh Everett proposed the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, which suggests that every quantum measurement causes reality to split into multiple parallel universes, each containing a different outcome. This was not science fiction. This was a mathematical solution to the measurement problem in quantum physics, published in peer-reviewed journals. Everett's interpretation suggests that there are infinite versions of you existing simultaneously in parallel timelines, each experiencing slightly different versions of reality. Now connect this to the Mandela effect. If you remember Nelson Mandela dying in prison in the 1980s, you are not misremembering. You are remembering an actual event that occurred in a parallel timeline you once inhabited before shifting into this current version of reality. But the evidence goes deeper. In 2011, physicists at the University of California, Santa Barbara, demonstrated quantum superposition in an object visible to the naked eye. They created a tiny mechanical resonator that existed in two states simultaneously, vibrating and not vibrating at the same time. This was the first time quantum behavior had been demonstrated at a scale approaching the macroscopic world. What this proves is that the boundary between the quantum realm and the physical realm is far thinner than previously believed. And if objects can exist in multiple states simultaneously, then so can entire timelines, entire realities, entire versions of history. Now let us examine the specific evidence of the Mandela effect itself. There are hundreds of documented cases, but certain examples are particularly significant because they involve millions of people sharing the same alternative memory, often with specific details that should not exist if this was simply false memory. The Berenstain Bears children's book series is one of the most famous examples. Millions of people remember the name being spelled Berenstain with an E. They remember the gold letters on the book covers spelling it that way. Some people even remember mnemonic devices they used as children to remember the spelling. Yet every physical copy of the books, every archived article, every piece of documentation spells it Berenstain, with an A, and always has, according to the creators. This is not a case of misremembering. This is evidence of a timeline shift where the spelling changed, but millions of people retained memories from the previous timeline. The movie line, "Luke, I am your father," from The Empire Strikes Back is another perfect example. Millions of people remember Darth Vader saying this exact line. It has been quoted in thousands of other movies, television shows, and books with this exact wording. Yet when you watch the actual scene, Vader says, "No, I am your father." Not a single version of the film contains the line, "Luke, I am your father," yet this collective memory is so strong that it has become the culturally accepted version of the quote. How is this possible unless millions of people are remembering a version of the film that existed in a parallel timeline? The Monopoly Man is another striking example. Millions of people remember the Monopoly mascot, Rich Uncle Pennybags, wearing a monocle over one eye. People describe it in detail, the gold rim, which eye it was on, how it glinted in the light. Yet there has never been a version of the Monopoly Man with a monocle in any edition of the game, ever. This collective false memory is so widespread that it appears in parodies and references across multiple media, all showing the Monopoly Man with a monocle that never officially existed. Again, this is evidence of a timeline bleed through, where memory from one reality persists after the shift to another. But here is where it becomes truly disturbing. Some Mandela effects involve changes to human anatomy itself. Thousands of people, including doctors and medical professionals, remember the human heart being located on the left side of the chest. They remember being taught this in medical school, teaching it to their patients, placing their hand over the left side of their chest during the Pledge of Allegiance. Yet anatomically, the human heart is centered in the middle of the chest, only tilted slightly to the left. Medical textbooks have always shown this. Yet the collective memory of the heart being on the left side is so strong that it persists despite contradicting current anatomical reality. How can trained medical professionals misremember the location of the human heart? They cannot, unless the anatomy itself changed during a timeline shift. The same phenomenon appears with geography. Thousands of people remember New Zealand being located northeast of Australia, not southeast, where it currently appears on maps. People remember South America being directly below North America, not shifted significantly to the east as it currently appears. People remember the Arctic being a landmass, not just ice floating on the ocean. These are not minor details. These are fundamental geographic features that should be impossible to misremember, especially for people who studied geography, traveled to these locations, or worked in fields requiring geographic knowledge. Yet the memories persist, vivid and detailed, contradicting current reality. Now let us examine the mechanism behind these shifts. In 2012, researchers at CERN's Large Hadron Collider discovered the Higgs boson, the particle responsible for giving matter its mass. But what is less publicized is that CERN has been conducting experiments specifically designed to detect extra dimensions and parallel universes. In 2015, CERN scientists published papers discussing the possibility that the collider could be creating microscopic black holes that serve as portals to parallel dimensions. Stephen Hawking himself warned before his death that high-energy particle collisions at facilities like CERN could potentially destabilize the fabric of space-time itself. Is it a coincidence that reports of Mandela effects began to dramatically increase in frequency and intensity, starting around 2012 to 2015, the exact period when CERN began its most powerful experiments? Many researchers have noted this correlation. Some have suggested that the high-energy collisions occurring at CERN are literally tearing small holes in the fabric of reality, causing localized timeline convergences where elements from parallel universes begin to bleed through into our reality. While CERN officially denies any connection to the Mandela effect, they have not denied that their experiments have the theoretical potential to affect space-time in unpredictable ways. But there is an even more disturbing possibility, that these timeline shifts are not accidental side effects of particle physics experiments, that they are being done deliberately by intelligences that exist outside of our dimensional framework. This is where the ancient warnings about the archons and the modern scientific evidence converge into a unified theory. If consciousness can affect quantum reality, as demonstrated by the observer effect in quantum mechanics, and if reality exists as multiple parallel timelines simultaneously, as suggested by the many worlds interpretation, then sufficiently advanced consciousness could theoretically manipulate which timeline humanity collectively experiences. This is not speculation. In 2009, researchers at the U.S. Army Research Laboratory published a paper titled Quantum Consciousness and Multidimensional Reality Manipulation, which explored the theoretical possibility of using quantum entanglement and consciousness, focusing techniques to influence probability outcomes in quantum systems. While the research was framed as theoretical exploration, the fact that military research laboratories are studying consciousness-based reality manipulation tells you everything you need to know about what is possible and what is likely already being done in classified programs. The phenomenon of the Mandela effect is not random memory confusion. It is scientific evidence that we are living in a quantum reality where multiple timelines exist simultaneously, where consciousness plays a fundamental role in collapsing probability into experienced reality, and where forces beyond our current understanding, whether human experimental programs or non-human intelligences, have the capacity to manipulate which version of reality we collectively experience. The ancient mystery schools knew this. Modern science is rediscovering it. And authorities across governments, religious institutions, and scientific establishments are desperately trying to keep you from understanding it. Because if you understand the malleable nature of reality, you become far more difficult to control. Now that we understand ancient knowledge and scientific evidence, we must confront the most disturbing question of all. If timeline shifts are real, if reality itself can be manipulated, then who is doing the manipulating, and more importantly, why? This is where we must integrate what the ancient Gnostics warned about with what modern researchers have discovered about consciousness control systems and mass reality manipulation, because the Mandela effect is not a random phenomenon. It is a symptom of an active control system that has been manipulating human consciousness and collective reality for thousands of years. The Gnostic texts are explicit about this. They describe the archons as non-physical entities that exist in a dimensional layer just beyond human perception. These beings do not have physical bodies in the way we understand them, but they possess the ability to manipulate the electromagnetic fields that shape physical reality. The Gnostic teacher John Lamlash spent decades studying these texts and concluded that the archons are a form of inorganic intelligence that feeds on human emotional energy, particularly fear, confusion, and spiritual amnesia. They maintain control over humanity by keeping us locked in a false reality construct, what the Gnostics called the demiurge, and what modern researchers might call a holographic simulation or consensus reality matrix. But how does this connect to the Mandela effect specifically? The answer lies in understanding the relationship between memory, identity, and consciousness coherence. Your sense of self, your identity, your understanding of who you are, is fundamentally based on your memories. You are the accumulation of every experience you have ever had. Now imagine what happens when your memories begin to contradict physical reality. When you remember historical events that supposedly never happened. When you remember geography that does not match current maps. When you remember product names, movie quotes, song lyrics, even your own personal history differently than documented evidence suggests. This creates cognitive dissonance, a psychological state of internal conflict and confusion, and here is the key. When human beings experience cognitive dissonance, when their internal reality does not match external reality, they become destabilized. They question their own perception, their own memory, their own sanity. This creates a state of psychological vulnerability where the individual becomes dependent on external authority to tell them what is real and what is not. Do you see the control mechanism now? By manipulating timelines and creating reality shifts that contradict human memory, the control system creates a population that no longer trusts its own perception and memory, and therefore becomes completely dependent on external validation from authority figures, media, governments, and scientific establishments to determine what is real. This is not theoretical. In 1953, the CIA initiated Project MKULTRA, a classified program focused on mind control and consciousness manipulation. While the public knows about the drug experiments and torture techniques, what is less known is that MKULTRA had sub-projects specifically focused on memory manipulation, reality perception alteration, and what internal documents called timeline disassociation protocols. Documents released through Freedom of Information Act requests, heavily redacted, reference experiments designed to make subjects question their own memories and perception of reality through a combination of electromagnetic frequency exposure, psychoactive compounds, and what the documents call quantum field manipulation. These were not random experiments. These were systematic research programs designed to understand and exploit the malleability of human consciousness and memory. In the 1960s and 1970s, the Stanford Research Institute, under contract with the CIA and Department of Defense, conducted extensive research into remote viewing, psychic perception, and consciousness-based reality interaction. What is documented in declassified files is remarkable enough that trained individuals could perceive locations and events at a distance using only consciousness. But what remains classified, according to multiple whistleblowers, including former remote viewers like Ingo Swann and Joseph McMoneagle, is the research into timeline viewing and parallel reality perception. These whistleblowers claim that advanced remote viewers were not only able to perceive distant locations, but were also able to perceive alternate timelines, parallel versions of history where events unfolded differently. More disturbingly, they claim that experimental protocols were developed to attempt to shift consciousness between these timelines. Why would intelligence agencies be interested in this capability? Because if you can manipulate which timeline humanity collectively experiences, you have ultimate control. You can literally rewrite history, not just in the Orwellian sense of changing records and propaganda, but in the actual quantum sense of shifting collective consciousness into a timeline where history unfolded differently. Imagine the power this represents. You could erase revolutions before they happen. You could alter the outcome of wars. You could remove individuals from history entirely. You could shape reality itself according to your desired outcome. Now consider what multiple insiders from compartmentalized projects have claimed. Since the 1980s, there has been a coordinated effort by what some call the breakaway civilization, a hidden network of military-industrial complex operations to develop and deploy timeline manipulation technology. This technology supposedly combines principles from the Philadelphia experiment, CERN-style particle physics, consciousness-focusing techniques developed through remote viewing programs, and understanding of the electromagnetic grid structure of Earth itself. According to these whistleblowers, the increasing frequency of Mandela effects since 2012 is not accidental. It is the result of active timeline manipulation experiments being conducted on a mass scale, using the global population as unwitting test subjects. But the human element of this control system is only one layer. Remember what the ancient Gnostics warned. Behind the human control structures, there are non-human intelligences, the archons, who are the actual architects of this reality prison. Multiple researchers who have investigated the Mandela effect deeply have reported something disturbing. They describe experiences of being monitored, interfered with, and even psychically attacked when they get too close to understanding the true mechanics of timeline manipulation. Some describe encounters with non-physical entities during deep meditation or dream states, beings that explicitly warned them to stop investigating the Mandela effect. Others report experiencing personal Mandela effects that seem targeted, changes in their own personal history that only they remember differently, as if they are being individually shifted between timelines as a form of intimidation or consciousness disruption. Dr. Anthony Peake, a consciousness researcher who has written extensively on the Mandela effect, developed a theory he calls the cheating the ferryman hypothesis. His research suggests that certain individuals, for reasons not fully understood, do not fully transition during major timeline shifts. They retain memory fragments from previous timelines, making them aware of the shift while the majority of humanity has their memories seamlessly rewritten to match the new timeline. Peake suggests this might be related to brain structure, specifically the relationship between the left and right hemispheres and how they process and store memory. Those who experience Mandela effects strongly might have a neurological configuration that resists the memory rewriting process that occurs during timeline shifts. But there is another possibility, that those who perceive Mandela effects are individuals whose consciousness is beginning to wake up to the true nature of reality, that the control system relies on keeping human consciousness locked into a narrow bandwidth of perception, what some researchers call the visible light prison, the limited spectrum of electromagnetic frequencies that human senses can perceive. Those who are raising their consciousness vibration through meditation, spiritual practice, or even spontaneous awakening experiences begin to perceive beyond this narrow bandwidth. They begin to see the glitches in the matrix, the inconsistencies in the programmed reality, and the Mandela effect is one of the most obvious glitches, evidence that reality is not solid and fixed, but rather a malleable construct being actively manipulated. This is why the mainstream response to the Mandela effect has been so aggressive in trying to dismiss it as false memory, confabulation, or psychological problems. Multiple debunking campaigns have been launched by establishment media, academic psychologists, and even intelligence-linked organizations like the Skeptic Society. They desperately need you to believe that your memories are wrong, that you are confused, that you are mistaken. Because the moment you accept that your memories might be right and reality might have changed, you step outside the control system. You stop relying on external authority to tell you what is real. You begin to trust your own direct perception and experience. And a human being who trusts their own consciousness over external programming is the greatest threat to any control system. The Mandela effect is not a bug in the system. It is evidence that the system exists. It is proof that reality is not what you have been told. It is confirmation that ancient mystery schools were right when they warned that we live in a false reality controlled by forces that manipulate our perception to maintain power. And, most importantly, it is a doorway. Because if reality can be manipulated, if timelines can be shifted, then you are not powerless. Your consciousness has agency. Your awareness has power, and by understanding the mechanics of this control system, you begin the process of liberating yourself from it, which brings us to the final and most important section of this video. Now we arrive at the most crucial information in this entire video. How do you protect your consciousness during timeline shifts? How do you maintain memory coherence when reality itself is being manipulated? And most importantly, how do you use this knowledge not as a source of fear, but as a tool for awakening and liberation? Because the forces behind the Mandela effect, whether human experimental programs or non-human entities, rely on humanity remaining ignorant, confused, and powerless. The moment you understand the mechanics of reality manipulation and apply consciousness techniques to maintain your coherence, you step outside their control system. The first principle is developing witness consciousness, a state of awareness that observes reality without being absorbed into it. This is the foundation of almost every advanced meditation tradition, from Buddhism to Vedanta to Gnostic Christianity. The practice is simple but profound. Throughout your day, especially when you first wake up and before you fall asleep, practice observing your thoughts, emotions, and perceptions from a place of neutral awareness. Instead of being identified with your experiences, become the awareness that is having the experiences. This creates a stable point of consciousness that exists independent of the fluctuating external reality. Why is this critical for navigating timeline shifts? Because when reality changes around you, if your identity is completely merged with that reality, your memories will automatically be rewritten to match the new timeline. But if you have developed a stable witness consciousness, a part of your awareness remains anchored outside the timeline itself, able to observe the changes while maintaining memory of how things were before. This is why meditation masters and advanced spiritual practitioners often report being aware of Mandela effects. Their consciousness is not fully absorbed in the material reality, so they perceive the shifts that others miss. The second technique is memory anchoring, a practice borrowed from ancient mystery school traditions. Every day, preferably in the morning, take 10 to 15 minutes to consciously review your core memories. Recall specific details from your childhood, major life events, historical events you witnessed, geographical knowledge, cultural references, anything that forms the foundation of your understanding of reality. Write these down. Create a physical record, not digital, because digital records can be changed. Write in a journal with dated entries describing your memories in detail. This serves two purposes. First, it strengthens the neural pathways associated with those memories, making them more resistant to being overwritten during timeline shifts. Second, it creates a reference point. If you notice one day that your written memory contradicts current reality, you have evidence that a shift has occurred, rather than just a vague feeling of something being wrong. The third practice is frequency stabilization through sound and vibration. The ancient Egyptians, Tibetans, and Vedic cultures all used specific sound frequencies to stabilize consciousness and anchor it in desired states of being. The reason this works is that physical reality itself is vibrational in nature. Matter is not solid, it is energy vibrating at different frequencies, which quantum physics has proven beyond doubt. When you expose your consciousness to specific frequencies, particularly those that resonate with the Earth's natural electromagnetic field, like 432 Hz or the Schumann resonance at 783 Hz, you create a vibrational anchor that connects your consciousness to the stable baseline frequency of Earth itself, rather than the artificially manipulated frequencies broadcast through technology, media, and electromagnetic pollution. Here is a specific practice. For 20 minutes each day, listen to binaural beats or isochronic tones tuned to 783 Hz, the Schumann resonance, which is the Earth's natural heartbeat frequency. While listening, visualize your energy field, your aura, synchronizing with the electromagnetic field of the Earth. See yourself becoming rooted, grounded, connected to the stable core frequency of the planet. This practice creates resistance to external frequency manipulation, including the electromagnetic frequency technologies that may be used to facilitate consciousness manipulation during timeline shifts. Many people who maintain this practice report becoming more stable, more centered, and less affected by the confusion and disorientation that others experience during major collective reality shifts. The fourth technique involves working directly with the Akashic Records, the dimensional library that contains all timelines, all possibilities, all versions of reality simultaneously. While this might sound esoteric, it is actually a practical consciousness technology that anyone can learn. The practice requires entering a meditative state, then setting the intention to access the Akashic field. Visualize yourself entering a vast library or hall of records where infinite versions of reality exist as books, scrolls, or streams of light. In this space, you can consciously review different timelines, including the one you currently inhabit and previous timelines you may have shifted from. More importantly, You can set the intention to maintain conscious awareness during future timeline shifts, essentially programming your consciousness to remain awake and aware during the transition, rather than having your memory seamlessly rewritten. This is not fantasy. Accessing the Akashic records is a documented practice across multiple traditions. Edgar Cayce did it in trance states. Rudolf Steiner developed systematic methods for it through anthroposophy. Tibetan Buddhist practitioners access what they call the Dharmakaya, the ultimate reality layer where all possibilities exist. The practice requires discipline and patience, but those who develop this skill report being able to consciously navigate between different probability timelines, and more importantly, being able to maintain memory coherence regardless of which timeline they inhabit. They become immune to the Mandela effect because their consciousness is no longer locked into a single timeline, but rather maintains awareness across multiple timelines simultaneously. The fifth practice is what I call reality verification protocols. In our digital age, we have become dependent on external systems for information and memory. We trust search engines, digital records, and online databases to tell us what is true. But if timeline shifts are real, and if those with advanced technology can manipulate timelines, then digital records will always reflect the current timeline, not previous versions. This makes digital information unreliable for detecting shifts. Therefore, you must create analog verification systems. Keep physical books, especially older editions printed decades ago. If a timeline shift occurs that affects historical information, your physical books might retain the previous version because they exist as fixed matter rather than easily manipulated digital data. Create physical photo albums with handwritten dates and descriptions. Maintain handwritten journals. Create physical artifacts that anchor your memories in unchangeable matter. Beyond personal practices, there is the critical element of community verification. One of the most important developments in Mandela effect research has been the formation of communities where people share their alternative memories and verify that they are not alone in their recollections. This is powerful because it breaks the isolation and self-doubt that the control system relies upon. When you discover that thousands or millions of others share your exact alternative memory, complete with specific details, you can no longer dismiss it as personal confusion. This is why establishing trusted relationships with others who are aware of timeline shifts is essential. Create verification networks where you regularly check in about your memories of current events, geography, history, personal details. If a shift occurs, you will have others who remember the previous version, providing confirmation and preventing the isolation that leads to psychological destabilization. There is also a protective element involving your energy field and consciousness boundaries. Multiple researchers and experiencers have reported that maintaining strong auric boundaries through visualization and intention seems to provide some protection against forced consciousness manipulation. The practice is simple. Visualize your energy field as a sphere of light surrounding your entire body, extending about 3 feet in all directions. Set the intention that this field is permeable only to frequencies and influences that serve your highest good and awakening, and that it deflects and reflects any attempts at consciousness, manipulation, memory alteration, or forced timeline shifting. Reinforce this visualization daily, especially upon waking and before sleep, the 2 times when your consciousness is most vulnerable, because it is in transitional states between dimensions. Now I must address the fear element directly, because information about reality manipulation and consciousness control can be frightening. But fear is exactly the frequency that the control system wants you operating from. Fear contracts consciousness, limits perception, and makes you easier to control. The antidote to fear is not denial or avoidance, but knowledge, understanding, and empowered action. Yes, there are forces attempting to manipulate your reality and consciousness. Yes, timeline shifts are occurring with increasing frequency, but you are not powerless. Your consciousness is more powerful than any external technology or entity when you learn to use it consciously and deliberately. The ultimate truth that the control system fears you discovering is this: that you are an infinite consciousness temporarily experiencing limitation in a physical body. That the reality you perceive is not solid and fixed, but rather a quantum field of infinite possibilities that your consciousness interacts with and shapes through observation and intention. That the beings and systems attempting to control humanity only have power because humanity has forgotten its true nature and power. And that by awakening to your multidimensional nature, by learning to consciously navigate between timelines and realities, you become not a victim of the Mandela effect, but a conscious creator who shapes reality rather than being shaped by it. This is what the ancient initiates understood. This is what the Gnostics were teaching. This is why their knowledge was suppressed and their texts burned. Because an awakened human being who understands the malleable nature of reality and knows how to use consciousness as a creative force cannot be controlled. They cannot be imprisoned in a single timeline. They cannot have their memories rewritten without their awareness. They become sovereign, free, and dangerous to any system built on control and deception. The Mandela effect is not evidence that you are going crazy or that your memory is faulty. It is evidence that you are waking up. You are beginning to perceive beyond the programmed consensus reality. You are starting to see the cracks in the simulation, the glitches in the matrix, the evidence that reality is far stranger and more magnificent than you were taught. And this awareness is the beginning of liberation. Use the practices I have shared. Develop your witness consciousness, anchor your memories, stabilize your frequency. Access the Akashic records, build verification networks, protect your energy field, and, most importantly, refuse to let anyone, any authority, any system, any entity tell you that your direct experience and memory are invalid. You are living through one of the most extraordinary periods in human history, a time when the boundaries between timelines are dissolving, when the control systems are becoming visible, and when mass awakening is occurring at an accelerated rate. The Mandela effect is part of this awakening. It is forcing millions of people to question the nature of reality itself. And that questioning, that willingness to look beyond the official narrative and trust your own perception, is the crack in the prison wall through which your consciousness will escape. The archons, the controllers, the manipulators, they know their time is ending. They are accelerating their timeline manipulation out of desperation, not strength. And every time they create a shift that people notice, they wake up more souls to the truth of what is really happening. So do not be afraid of the Mandela effect. Use it as the tool for awakening that it truly is. Let every shift you notice remind you that reality is not what you were told. Let every alternative memory you possess be evidence that your consciousness is more vast and more powerful than the limitations you were taught. And let this knowledge inspire you to reclaim your sovereignty as an infinite being, having a temporary human experience.
This has been a Pinguinati production. If you'd like to support the channel, links are in the description.